Okay.
Oh,
I wasn't gonna start like the recording until he got here. I was gonna be like, for the
Yeah.
purpose of our class, like, do we have permission to record a conversation?
yeah.
Just so
Yeah.
it's not like, because I know like we have to, because we have to, but I guess just for his own.
Yeah. Do you think he like saw my first email, like the one I sent around 12?
He should look back at his email, right?
I don't know, I hope he did. Because I mean, I feel like he didn't have to respond to it, but he didn't respond to it.
Yeah, like, oh, I will be sending a link, blah blah blah.
Yeah. It's okay.
We'll see.
I feel like if it doesn't work out this time, we'll be like actually cooked.
I mean,
If he
you
doesn't
never
come, there's
know.
nothing we can do. So
Yeah, you're
How
right.
do I share? Do you guys have to request to share or?
Are we gonna share screens?
Yeah, I was just gonna share the presentation of Giuliano. Or should we just like verbally introduce us? Do you guys want to do the mini? We're supposed to, right? That's what he
I
said.
think we're supposed to send them to him.
I feel like we should just like I'm not sure. I was unclear about that part because I think we're supposed to present in class, but we never did it. So I think we should just like formally just like introduce ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Okay, should we try to answer like the same questions though?
Yeah, like we can like answer it, but like I feel like it doesn't need to be like as probably in depth as it was one-on-one, just kind of like a brief overview. But
Okay,
yeah,
I'll just say like my name, my major, why I chose St. Mary's, and I guess that's it. That's really it.
And if he
yeah.
asks any questions to us, we can just answer them too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. We're locked. We're locked. He shouldn't be able, or I mean, he doesn't need a request. Like you guys were just automatically let able to join, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Wait, what document are the questions on?
It's like on the
timetable.
announcements. Oh, it's
Oh,
already
because he's
recording. Right.
yeah. We can just
Wait,
stop.
if I just click stop recording, it'll save. It'll automatically will find it.
Yeah, it'll save it to your as long as it's on computer, I think.
Okay.
Mhm.
Let's check our emails. Maybe. Okay, so we're just gonna introduce ourselves.
Yeah.
Cool. I hope that this takes like an hour. I feel like it might. At least it should take at least an hour, I feel like.
Yeah. Wait, where are the questions? I swear I saw them the other day.
It's in the email I
Or
sent.
the email.
It's in one of the emails. Okay.
I noticed that there's only 8 questions because there's like it's missing a number three, but
I don't think that was on us. I think that was like how it
it
was
was
made.
like in the doc. Yeah, it was like listed like that. How are we gonna know like when he's done answering a question? Like, oh, hello.
Perfect. Brian, do you want or does anyone want to go first to introduce themselves?
Sure, I can go. Hello, Miguel. Ryan Jimenez. I'm a third year in the dual degree engineering program. I'm from San Jose, California. I went to Bellarmine High School. And I guess a little bit about myself is that I'm on the men's club lacrosse team here at St. Mary's. And I guess my decision to come to St. Mary's was due to it being kind of close to home. I wasn't too sure if I wanted to like live far from home, and I think it was like a very comfortable setting when I toured. I really liked the environment and the class sizes. And yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Miguel. My name's Giuliano. I am a third year global regional studies major. I'm from Pleasanton, California, so about half an hour away. And I'm also on the men's club lacrosse team with Ryan.
Wait, what
Um,
was um your major again?
Global regional studies.
What does that involve?
It's kind of just a combination of a lot of the liberal arts. So it's specifically politics, history, language studies, economics, and it's just kind of like a combination of a lot of the liberal
Right,
arts programs.
right.
And one of the main reason I decided to come to St. Mary's is because it was like local, and it was like within California, and both my mother and my grandmother went there, so I'd already knew about the school, and when I toured it, I just like fell in love with the campus.
Right.
I'm Haley. I'm a senior at St. Mary's, and my major is early elementary teaching, so I want to be an elementary school teacher. And I chose St. Mary's because my aunt went here, and I kind of always knew about the campus, and I had a lot of opportunity with like financial aid, which was really helpful. So, um, yeah, I just love Moraga and being in the East Bay, so I chose St. Mary's, and I'm on the rowing team too.
Oh,
Hmm.
that's cool. That started, women's rowing started, I think, when I was there.
Oh,
When I
really?
was a freshman, I think.
My uncle also went to St. Mary's, and he was on the men's crew team.
Oh,
So it's kind of funny. Like we both did rowing, yeah.
oh, okay. I got your questions, and I took pretty much all day yesterday trying to remember what I was doing 50 years ago, 60 years ago. I'm old. I'm gonna be 72 this year. So I'll start by answering your first question,
Oh yeah.
which was, but hold on, let me turn my phone off. Okay. Um, some of these questions kind of are similar in some ways, so I won't specifically answer the questions, but I will combine some
Mhm.
questions. I think giving you the same information you're looking for. So, um, I was born in Mexico back in 1954 in Guadalajara, Jalisco. I don't know if you guys ever been to Mexico or not, but I always thought that was I always thought that used to be the most beautiful city in Mexico. But obviously I'm biased. But um, anyway, my parents, I have five brothers and three sisters. And the first four of us, first four males, were all born in Mexico. And the remaining five were all born in Los Angeles. Um, we moved to LA when I was 2 years old. Um, my dad and my uncle, before we moved up here, my dad and one of my uncles actually came up to the United States to look for work. And they saw opportunities. They didn't really find any work, but they found opportunities. So they went back and they gathered us all up and we all moved up here. Um, it was kind of an interesting story. My dad um, convinced a friend of his to drive us all the way from Guadalajara to Nogales in Arizona in his car. And he paid him, I guess. But everywhere we arrived in Nogales, and then we jumped on a Greyhound bus to Los Angeles. My mom, my dad, and four kids. Um, and from there, we came up here to Oakland for only about a month or so, and then went back down to LA because there was more opportunities. Even though there was a lot of industrial work up in Oakland at that time, there was actually, I think, better opportunities down in LA. Um, so we lived with family, friends of the family, in different housing, and we eventually settled in what's called the Maravilla projects in LA, and it's one of the notorious housing projects in LA. I think they had like a couple hundred units, maybe 300 units. And the thing about East LA, that's where the projects were located. Um, I always thought of East LA as a bubble um, because when we were there, I would say there 90% of the people who lived there were Mexican. There was a small amount of Chinese and Japanese and blacks. This was that area in East LA kind of grew um, after the Second World War, and a lot of people from Mexico came up to the U.S. during the war in what was called the Bracero program. Bracero refers to your arm, brazo, and they needed a lot of manual laborers, and they couldn't fill all this need for all these jobs because all the U.S. Men were fighting the war. So they had this program, and they imported. Actually let millions of people come up, and that actually ended in the '60s. It started around in the '40s. It actually ended in the '60s, but um, back in 1954, I think, there was something called, gotta look at my note here. It was called Operation Wetback. I don't know if you guys have heard that term before. Um, people who came from, a lot of people who came from Mexico illegally used to have to swim across the Colorado River. Colorado River goes from, the middle of the U.S. all the way down to Baja California, the Gulf of California. And part of that, where they had to cross, was the border between the U.S. and Mexico. And to do that, you have to swim across, or cross, in shallow areas. So in the U.S., they call them wetbacks because they have to get their backs wet to come up. So it's a derogatory term, but they had this program, even though they had invited all these people from Mexico to come up to the U.S. to work because the servicemen were in Europe and Far East and so forth. Um, they turned right around after the war and said, we can't fill the jobs, or there's not enough jobs for Americans. So they shipped like 1 million of them back. They just deported them. And it wasn't just Mexican citizens, kind of like what's going on now with ICE and all that. If you looked Mexican, you were gone. So it wasn't a good situation. But interestingly enough, my dad came up here 2 years later to the U.S. So it's kind of a strange thing, U.S. policy. When you have when the economy's suffering, or you need workers to prop up the economy, they bring in all these foreign workers. And then when the economy goes bad and they need somebody to blame, they blame those people and they ship them out. And it's a cycle. It's been repeated from back in the Depression era times in the '30s, after the war, and even now. So it's not something unusual. It just keeps repeating. Let's see. So as I mentioned, when we lived in the projects, it was in East LA. It was a bubble. Okay, if you can imagine, if you have 90% people from your culture, a lot of them spoke Spanish. Um, so there was also, in these projects, there was the gangs. And our local gang was called the MP Boys, the Maria Projects Boys. And interesting enough, in the projects there was the offices where you paid your rent, where they had their maintenance offices and so forth. And then right behind that, they used to have these rows of projects, and there were buildings that had like single story and 6 units to each one of them, and it was just rows and rows and rows. And we lived in the first row, and these guys, the gang, the MP boys, they used to congregate between our apartment and the offices at night. I mean, they just would hang out there, smoking and drinking and fighting, whatever. And my dad did everything he could to get rid of them. He'd go out there and try to nudge them away. They kept coming back. My dad would. There were no lights, no street lights really, because we were kind of in the middle of this big block, and there weren't really a lot of street lights there. So my dad would put up lights outside our house, shining right on these guys. And I'd say about 10 times these guys would throw rocks and blow out the lights, and they'd all be back. And it was kind of interesting. I mean, they didn't really bug us. They were just, a bad influence. And my dad and my mom were they had a strong influence on all of us. They taught us to stay away from those, work hard, study hard, and so forth. So we never really joined the gang. Okay, but interesting tidbit. The gang colors, the way they dressed, it was always khaki pants, white t-shirts, or Pendletons, or oversized shirts, and you would recognize these guys everywhere. Okay, when we went to Catholic school there, about 3 or 4 blocks away, and the school uniform was khaki pants and khaki colored shirts. So in school, I used to pretend that I was in the gang, and my schoolmates thought I was a peewee, which is, the younger set, though I never was. I thought that was kind of interesting. So Spanish was kind of like my first language till about till I was 4 years old. And that's when my older brothers were already going to school. They were learning English, they were talking English. And so I slowly picked it up. Um, when I started school, um, interestingly enough, my name is Miguel Angel. And all of a sudden I became Michael. The nuns just changed my name. And I don't know if it was easier for them to pronounce or what, but from that point through high school, I became Mike. Everybody called me Mike. Even my cousins, some of my cousins who lived nearby, same thing. There's one cousin who still calls me Mike to this day, no matter what. Um, so that was the first time I experienced that kind of thing where you're kind of well, I don't know what really to call it, but your identity is kind of taken away from you, a little part of it. But I didn't know any better, so I let it go. My parents didn't really try to stop it or anything. I don't know, it was because they didn't want to put up any problems or anything like that. In either case, in grammar school, I was one of the tallest kids. I was the tallest kid in my class. I was very athletic. I did really well in school. I was top of my class in a lot of things. So I was kind of like, starting from around the 5th grade, I was kind of like a leader in my class. I felt like these younger kids or the smaller kids kind of looked up to me. Um, in fact, in the summer of after 7th grade, the nuns approached me and they said, "Oh, because you're doing so well and blah blah blah, we're wondering if you would want to go to this summer course." Um, it was an air. It was focused on the space race, aerospace or the space race. I don't know if you guys recall or may have heard of the space race in the 60s between the US and Russia, who was going to be the first to get to the moon and all that stuff. So in the summer of after my 7th grade, they awarded me a scholarship to attend this class. And what it was is they took kids who were 13 and 14 years old from all over LA, and they shipped them to Beverly Hills High School. You guys are familiar with Beverly Hills, right? It's a very rich enclave in LA. And yeah, so I mean that was an experience. And I'll get back to that. But that was one of the things that I was kind of proud of. Got my name in the paper, photo, and all that stuff. I thought it was pretty cool. Um, One of the things about living in that part of town, and everybody was lower middle class, poor, uh, as in other areas, other like the ghettos or radios, um, basketball was the thing. My brothers played basketball. I played basketball. In fact, my second brother, he played on the. He was the first to play in the basketball team at our grammar school, and they went on to win the CYO championships in LA. And then my second brother, I thought my second brother also, I thought they went into the semifinals with that, but he said, nah, we weren't good enough. So, but I mean, we played basketball all the time. That was where everybody from the neighborhood congregated, and it was located right at the church because the school was right next to the church. And it was an outlet. We didn't have anything else to do, like after school or in the summer or anything like that. So that was a big deal to us, and being tall, I was able to play with against a lot of the older kids and so forth. I even tried out for the team when I was in the sixth grade because I thought I thought I was better than the seventh graders. I really did, but I wasn't chosen. But it broke my heart because this other guy, he was a little bit shorter than me, and me and him were always in competition as being the leaders or the captains of the teams and all that stuff. They chose him. So that really, it broke my heart. But anyway, in seventh grade, we went out again and I was chosen. And right in the middle of the season, in seventh grade, we had this really terrible teacher, and she literally had a nervous breakdown in her class. I mean, she couldn't control the class. And when we saw that she was having a difficult time, we started screwing around in class. Well, she left. She walked out. And about 10 minutes later, here comes the principal and another nun. They were both nuns, and she said, "Okay, you guys, you screwed up. Everybody who was screwing around, stand up." And unfortunately, I was sitting in the front, right in the front seat. And I said, "Oh crap," And my dad had always taught me to be responsible too for my actions. So I felt guilty. I mean, I wasn't the worst guy. I mean, I was playing around, but I wasn't the worst. So I stood up, and I thought most of the class was standing up. There was only like 6 or 7 people, and I was kind of shocked. But anyway, the nuns put us all into a station wagon, and they drove us to each of our homes, and they walked us up. And in the projects, you had to walk like, I don't know, 40, 50 yards from the parking lot to our apartment. And here are these 2 nuns walking through the neighborhood with me in tow, and my mom was there, and they told my mom what happened, and my mom was just she was pissed, but she didn't do anything. And she goes, "Just wait till your dad gets home." And my dad got home late because he used to he was working, but he was going to school, so forth. He got home really, really late, and I didn't see him. And so the next day I was going, "Oh, good, nothing's gonna happen." So as I was walking out with my lunch, and I got we always used to get a blessing from my mom when we left the house. And I went up to my mom to give me my blessing. And she says, "You can't leave." Hold on a second. I tend to lose my voice, so if you guys don't understand or if my voice gets too low, just let me know. Anyway, so I'm waiting there for my dad. He was taking a shower and I was waiting, waiting, waiting. And finally I knocked on the door and I said, "Dad, you wanted to see me?" He said, "Get your uniform and take it back to school. You're off the team." So I was heartbroken. And here I was. I came back to school and I went back to school and I went up to the nun who was the one of the nuns who had walked through our neighborhood. And I just shoved the uniform at her and I said, "My dad kicked me off the team." And I walked out and that was it. It was another devastating point in my life. Because, you know, as I mentioned before, basketball was my life.
You need to like practice with your friends and still play basketball after that?
No.
No.
I mean, I still played other times, but my dad forbid me from being connected with the team.
Yeah.
I still did well in school. Um, in eighth grade, I joined the team again. I was, you know, the center because I was the tallest, and we were doing pretty well. But then, and this is in, I guess, '68. Um, Unfortunately, in February of 1968, my dad bought a house, and we moved away from East LA. So I had to quit the team. So that was a very devastating point. We moved. We moved. It was only like 8, 9 miles away. It was a house, but it was like a culture shock. Here we had lived in East LA in that area where 90% of the people were people like me. We spoke Spanish at school, English during class, and so forth. But to each other, we'd speak Spanish, English, a mixture. And then we moved to this town, which was a middle or lower class, lower class or working class community. But 50% of the people were white. I'd say about 35, 40% were Mexican, and the rest were Asian and black. But it was lower middle class. So I go to this school, junior high school, and there's like, in my class, I'd say there were maybe 35 kids there. Go to the school that there were like 100 kids in my class. It was like a typical, um, I won't say, yeah, maybe. I don't know how junior high schools are now, but it was kind of like a high school where you went to different classrooms for your classes. So obviously I joined the basketball team, hoping, make friends and do that and so forth. There were two guys that were at least as tall or taller than I was. So I was no longer the star. I was the new guy. And, but I had fun. I mean, with three tall guys, on the team, we devastated all the other schools and won our league. And that was pretty cool. And I was even chosen for the All-Star team, which was, I mean, having only been there half a year was kind of unusual. But and we went to tournaments as the All-Star team and so forth. But it was a different environment. It was entirely different. I mean, we couldn't speak Spanish. I mean, most the kids that I went to school with there were different from the kids in LA, even the Mexican kids. They hardly ever spoke Spanish there. There were more white kids. I got into more fights there than I ever did in East LA. It was just different. I felt out of place. Um, anyway, so my dad bought that house. We moved away, and beyond that, I quit playing basketball as an organized sport because I was like 5'8", 5'9" in eighth grade, and I just stopped growing. And by the time I got to high school, there were kids way taller than I was. So and played better. So I pretty much just played in the playgrounds and pretty much with family. I didn't really have a lot of friends. Um, when I was a little kid, I was very much an introvert because I was alone by myself. My older brothers were at school, so I was on my own pretty much for about 4 or 5 years. My younger brothers and sisters were too young, so I would just explore stuff all over our neighborhood, and I hung around by myself, you know. But here at this new place, and so when I got older, kind of that quietness or that introvert nature kind of died off when I became more of a leader in my classes. But when I went to this junior high and being around, 1,000 students, or not maybe 1,000, maybe 500 students, it all came back. I was quiet unless I was playing basketball. Um, so when I got to high school, I played soccer. My oldest brother, um, well, I'll get back to, well, maybe, see, how should I frame that? I played soccer in high school for 3 years. In my senior year, they canceled the soccer program. And then eventually, when I went to St. Mary's, I played there too. So that's that was kind of my childhood as far as school and that kind of stuff.
Um,
Uh, my family was, I would say, it's typically like Mexican American in Southern California. Like I said, I had 5 brothers and 3 sisters. Um, my dad was in Mexico. He used to drive, or rather, his father owned the bus line. And I don't know if you guys ever been to Mexico, but there's buses everywhere, and there's different types of buses. I mean, they're all different. There's a lot of companies in every city, um, and they drive certain routes, and there's other companies that drive other routes. It's not like say here in Contra Costa, you have the one bus line that does all the transportation. There were literally um, hundreds. And my grandfather owned a bus company. He had like 5 or 6 buses, and his brothers, my uncles, would drive buses for him. Um, my my dad and and my uncles also were participated in driving the buses and fixing the buses and so forth. My dad also drove trucks. So in that period, Mexico was growing slowly. Infrastructure like roads and stuff was being built. My dad would drive trucks, either delivering materials or hauling materials out to these sites. So he was gone for stretches at a time in Mexico. In fact, there was one time when he was gone. I don't know if when he was working as a truck driver or when he first came up to the U.S., but he came back home and he had been gone so long, and I was only like 1.5 years old. I didn't recognize him, and I went and hid. I think I went to hide under the bed because I didn't know who he was. But anyway, when we moved up to LA, my dad had a bunch of jobs. He um, he worked at a shoe factory. Um, he worked at a cheese factory. He used to come home stinking. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with cheese factories, but they reek from all the whey that's produced. He would just he would stink really bad. um, he also he sold pots and pans door to door. He sold vacuums door to door. Um, at one point, I think when I was in fourth grade, I was still going to school. He and my uncle took me and my next two brothers who were, so in fourth grade I was like 10 years old. My next brother was 12, and I mean, go back. Yeah, 10. My two older brothers were 12 and 14, 13, somewhere around there. We drove up from LA to, I can't recall if it was Bakersfield or Fresno, to pick fruit. Um, and I remember that distinctly. Actually, in fourth grade, I was 10 years old. We were 10, 12, and 14. Um, so, my mom says they're not going to let, me work. I mean, I know looking back now, I realize that a lot of kids worked in the fields back then. And my mom was saying, no, no, don't take him. They're not going to take him. He's not going to be able to work. So as we were growing up, my dad, took me aside and said, look, if we can't get you a job, you can just stay wherever we're living and you can cook meals for us. And I said, okay. I mean, 10 years old. I mean, how realistic is that? Anyway, we didn't, we only stayed 2 days. Um, I'm not really sure of the reason why. I don't know if they couldn't find jobs or um, one of my brothers said my dad felt the work was too difficult for my brothers. Um, whatever the reason, I think 2 or 3 days later we came back to LA and we never went back. So thankfully, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, that would have been even a harder life than the one we had in LA. My dad kept working, looking for jobs, as I mentioned, and he started going to school because he wanted to get better. He wanted to learn a trade and make a living, a decent living, and so forth. He went to one of the trade tech schools, and the first time he learned how to be a TV repairman. And this is back in the days when TVs had test tubes and the big cathode tubes and so forth. And he opened up a shop in East LA, TV repair. And I remember going with him to the store, and it was a small place. But it was on a kind of a busy intersection, busy street, and so my dad really felt that it was a promising situation. What he didn't count on was the local gang. They came by one time and said, "We'll watch your business here so that there's no trouble, with anybody. We'll protect you." And my dad said, "Oh, thank you very much." But then the guy says, "But you gotta pay." My dad had just started this business. He didn't have money for that. So my dad said, "Screw you," and he told him to get lost. And 2 or 3 days later, somebody threw a rock through the front glass window, and that was the end of that. I mean, my dad said, "It's not going to work." So eventually, he went back to school. I think in order to go to trade tech, let me back up a little bit. My mom and dad, I think they only went to high school, what's considered ninth or 10th grade. Um, and that's about it. That was the extent of their education. So when he was trying to go to school down in LA to the trade tech, he had to get his GED, the GED equivalent. It was called something else back then. So he got that. He learned English, went to school to learn English. Uh, and the second time he went back to learn how to become a truck mechanic. And from that, he got a job. There's a company called Sparklets Drinking Water. I don't know if up here if you've seen those trucks that say, I can't remember the name. It's these blue trucks that deliver to your homes and so forth. I forget what they're called, but they're owned by Sparklets now. So he worked for their plant in LA, and then he moved to a different town in Santa Ana, I think near Disneyland. And he worked for them for 25 years, and he made a really good living off of it. My mom, my mom raised us. I mean, at one time I was trying to figure it out. There was like a 5 year period where we had 8 kids living at home. Um, so she had a full time job, time and a half, you might say. It was constant meal preparation, laundry, everything, and the older kids, the 4 older kids, would always help out because that was part of the job, part of being in the family. We had jobs like my second oldest brother would sweep the house, and my second brother would mop the house, and I would do all the dishes. So it was like kind of like that, we all. But it wasn't a drudge. I remember cleaning the house, and we'd be singing songs, pretending we were the Temptations or the some other group singing songs, doing dance moves all through the house. So it wasn't. It was a to me it was a fun time. Um, I mentioned that the four of us, 4 oldest brothers, were born in Mexico, and then the other 5 were born in LA. And there's a big difference between us. There, there's a I don't know what it is. We're just different. All 4 of us, the oldest brothers, we all graduated from college. None of my sister did. I think only 1 or 2 of them went to college for a year, maybe. Uh, One younger brother did graduate from Loyola. Um, Another brother followed my dad's footsteps and went to a trade tech and became a truck mechanic too. So when I was younger, I idolized each of my older brothers in different ways. Um, and I'll get into that a little bit more. Um, Getting back to my mom or my parents, the fact that Mexico is still very much a country where you see a lot of machismo, where the man of the house is the one who rules. It's not everywhere, it's changing, but it was even worse back then. So even though we came to LA, it was still there. My dad treated my mom with respect. He would There was a lot of corporal punishment for the the kids, but he never he never did that to my mom. He respected her a lot. And so my mom, I used to sit with her a lot of times, and she told me she always wanted to learn English, which is funny. She understood English very well, and she could communicate. She could get what she wanted to somebody who didn't speak Spanish. She could, but she was self-conscious because she didn't really understand it. She always wanted to learn, but my dad said, no, you need to stay home and take care of the kids. She also wanted to learn how to drive. I'm losing my voice already. And anyway, she always wanted to learn how to drive. My dad wouldn't do it. So it was that kind of situation. Um, my oldest brother, I wrote my notes down, so I want to refer to them. Excuse me, I gotta get the right page up. You guys can stop if you have any questions. Stop me. Um, Jeez.
I do have one question. So you mentioned that you went to like private school. Was that just for like elementary or like throughout junior high?
Except for that period when I was in junior high, I went to a public school. When we first moved to that one town. Grammar school was the Catholic school. Uh, in high school, I went to Catholic school also.
Do you think like that shaped you in any way as well? Like who you are today?
Yes, that's actually what I was going to get into.
Okay.
Um, Jeez, I lost the page. Hold on a second. I lost the page here. What was your third question?
The one that we sent to you?
Yeah.
I believe it is, how did your upbringing shape your personality, values, and outlook on life?
Jeez, that's where I had that answer and I can't find it
Uh,
now. Okay, go on the fly. All right. So, well, I'll get to that part a little bit later. Let me just finish off my family. My oldest brother. Let me just start. Um, my parents were I won't say hardcore Catholics, but they were strong Catholics. I mean, coming from Mexico, um, they brought that with them here to the U.S. And so, pretty much all through grammar school, our lives revolved around the church. My dad volunteered for countless things. Um, he was always over there. They used to have this men's group called in Spanish, translated from Spanish, it's called the Nocturnal Adoration Group. And it was a men's group. They'd come in, I don't know if it was the first Friday of the month or something. They'd come in at like 11 o'clock at night and they'd pray the rosary till like 1 o'clock. And then they'd have coffee or whatever. And it was never really understood that. But he would drag me along and my brothers along sometimes. But what I wanted to convey is he was very strong Catholics. And consequently, we were also very strong. My oldest brother, when he came to the U.S., he went into sixth grade, I think, and he went into the seminary in high school. Back then, I don't think it's done anymore, but they had seminaries in high school. So kids as young as 13 were going in there during high school, and then they keep going if they continued, through college and so forth. So he went off. He was gone. Um, he became a brother, kind of like the Christian brothers, but a different order. And he was like a cook. He became an administrator. Eventually, moved up in the hierarchy and eventually managed this huge property for them. Um, and later, he came up to San Francisco and went to school at USF. Uh, I think to get his degree. Because I think he went to college for a couple of years, um, and then he stopped, and then he convinced them to let him go back to school. So he came up to USF, finished his degree, and was a brother up here. Um, Interestingly enough, he left right after that. Um, my second brother, he was my idol when I was a kid. He was a he was a star basketball player. Um, I don't know if you guys have heard of Cathedral High School down in LA. That's where he went to school. He played basketball there all 4 years. He was the first one. He bought a car when he was in high school. This '63 Chevy Impala. I remember that car because we used to go cruising in East LA on the weekends. It was a beautiful car. Um, my brother, when he came to he went to St. Mary's because Cathedral was the Christian Brothers managed that school. They told him about St. Mary's, so he came up to St. Mary's. He didn't play basketball there because he was as tall as I was. Um, he was too short, and there are better players in college, obviously. But he ended up playing rugby, and he'd always come back with these stories of these brutal games and the kegers and playing, going off to. They used to have the rugby trip, even back then. I think when he was there, they went to England and Paris, London and Paris, and I was just like eyes wide open. Um, my third brother Ernie, he he played basketball with us, and we were the closest in age, so we always hung out together. We always did everything together. Um, he protected me in grammar school, even though I was one of the taller, bigger kids in my class. Um, one time, this little bit shorter guy, me and him got into a. It wasn't really a fight. It was more like a. Ended up being more like a wrestling match, but he got the better of me, and the guy pinned me on my back, and he was, you know, and my brother just boom, kicked his butt. Um, he went to Santa Clara University and played soccer there for a couple of years, and then I think he quit because he didn't like the program, and he eventually became a teacher, and I think he went to Idaho, Boise, Idaho, or somewhere near Boise, Idaho, and he taught at some migrant schools up there. Eventually, he moved back to LA, taught a little bit more there. Didn't make any money, so he left and went into insurance, and he did really well for himself. Um, my younger brothers and sisters, they went to Bishop Amat High School in LA. Um, I don't. We were all different. The three, four of us, like I said before, we're all different. They were. They had. Well, I'll get back to why. um, so that's pretty much my family right there. Strong Catholics. One of the benefits of being strong Catholics and my dad volunteering at the church, and not just him volunteering. He'd volunteer us, obviously, but at one time I think we had 4 kids in grammar school, and tuition back then, the cost of living was very low. It wasn't that much, but we had 4 kids at one time at the grammar school, and I always wonder how they managed that. My mom told me, well, they gave us a break, a discount. But it was really my dad volunteering for all this shit at the church and the school, and um, because of that, being so closely associated with the church and the school, we were all altar boys. Back when the mass was in Latin, you could become an altar boy as young as second grade. Uh, the only requirement was that you learn to pronounce the Latin phrases, because back then the Mass was in Latin. And you had to memorize, I think, the first part in order to become an altar boy. And I mean, this is second grade, you know, memorizing stuff in Latin. It's kind of crazy. Um, but yeah, I became an altar boy in, I think, second or third grade. I think we all were altar boys. And, you know, just to point out that the church and the school were a central point of our lives. Everything seemed to revolve around the church or the school. Um, what else was I going to say about that? Well, it's because of that that for myself, well, the other thing about my family and my parents, they were very strong Catholics. I mean, too strong. I mean, we did everything revolved around the church. And in a way, I always felt nowadays, in my latter life, you know, after college, that that the church took advantage of us. We were all altar boys. Um, it had its benefits, you know. I remember we used to do weddings and funerals, and when you did weddings, what the altar, yeah, the altar boys would go back, you know, when the bride and groom were coming out of the church. We'd stand out there with our little these little vessels, and we asked donations for the altar boy society. Well, there wasn't really an altar boy society. It was more to get some money that we could take home. So, you know, we had some good days and bad days, you know. And at different times when I was in seventh and eighth grade, um, I would make like 5, $10 at weddings. You know, you'd have one or two or three weddings on Saturdays, and we'd come home with, you know, 5, $10, and I'd give it to my mom, you know. And it was one of those times when my dad was in between jobs and stuff, and my mom would look forward to us bringing money home to feed us. And I didn't understand that. I just got home, I gave him the money, that was it. So in between the seventh and eighth grade, my dad was talking to the pastor. Well, let me back up a bit. The priests at my parish were Spanish at that age, though the community was almost 100% Mexican American. And, you know, the history of Mexico and Spain, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it, but we were like a colony of Spain, Mexico, and then we gained our independence and blah, blah, blah. But there's a huge Spanish influence in Mexico. And it's more like ah, it's like overlords. You know, that in Mexico, the priests are revered. You know, they're like God's messengers or whatever, you know. People kiss their hands, and, you know, you're supposed to only do that to bishops, you know, they kiss their ring and stuff. People kiss the priests, you know, they gave money to the church all the time. Even in LA, as an altar, we were all altar boys too, me and my brothers. Um, that that's how we made money at weddings. We'd go after the wedding and ask for money for the altar boy society. And um, anyway, I just want to bring that small point because it plays a part. So they were all Spanish. Okay, So my dad and would always volunteer for crap at the church. And one time the pastor said, during the summer, everybody takes off. We don't have anybody serving mass on Sundays. So my dad says, no problem. My son will do it. And he told me, he says, I want you to go to the 9 o'clock mass and stay till the 12 o'clock mass and just stay there to make sure there's at least one altar boy. I said, what? This is in the summer. Okay. So for like 10 weeks, I had to go there at 8:30 to make sure there were altar boys. And if there weren't, I had to serve the mass. And back then, the uh, the 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock mass was served by the altar boys from the public school, and the 10 o'clock, no, I'm sorry, the 9 and 11 o'clock were served by the altar boys from the Catholic school, and the 10 o'clock and the 12 o'clock, it was the kids from the public school. So I was there for 4 masses every Sunday. And so the pastor says, okay, well, if your son does that, as a token of my appreciation, I'll give him $3. You know, standard of living was lower back then. $3 wasn't a lot, but um, it was something. So I said, my dad my dad didn't ask me. He told me to go do it. So every Sunday I was there, and I would just sit there, just wait for all the boys to show up. And if they didn't, sometimes I was serving all 4 masses. Um, I hated it. I hated it. And the pastor said after the first week, he saw that I was coming. He says, "Well, come by the office afterwards." And I said, "All right." And when I went in there, he says, "Here, this is for your trouble," and he would give me $3. So I'd go home and I say, "Mom, he gave me $3." He says, "Oh, great," because during that period, my dad was in and out of work. Um, um, we're trying to go to school to learn a trade, and we really could use. My mom says we really depend on those $3. Standard of living was lower back then. So I went through like 5 weeks. The guy said after the last mass, just come to my office, and so I'd go there. He says $3. I said, "Oh, good." Go home, give it to my mom. She goes, "Oh, great," you know. And then I think it was like I think I did it for like about 9 or 10 weeks in the summer. Um, on the seventh week, I went in, knocked on the door to his in the rectory. He says, "Oh, you're here." He says, "Oh, yeah," and he gave me a funny look. And he reached into his pocket, and instead of giving me 3 bills, he gave me a rolled up bill. And I said, "Okay, there's 3 bills in it." I took it, put it in my pocket, went home, and gave it to my mom. And she goes, "There's only $1 here. Did you spend it?" I said, "No, that's all he gave me." And she goes, you know. So I thought it was a mistake. She thought it was a mistake. The next week, same thing happened. He only gave me $1. And that really pissed me off. Um, pissed my mom off because she depended on that money. Um, but it's just a little anecdote for something later. um, anyway, so my family was very strongly religious, strong Catholics. Um, as I mentioned, my oldest brother became a religious brother. We would go visit him all the time at the seminary every weekend. Um, we were all altar boys. Um, my third brother went into the seminary. He was there for 2 years. Then he dropped out. I looked up to him and my oldest brother and my parents. And I thought that's what they wanted me to do too. So I went in there too, which was probably one of the bigger mistakes I ever made. But I stuck it out because, well, for different reasons. I really thought I had a vocation, but I was 13 years old. Think about that. Do you really know what you want to be? Or can you really tell what you want to be at 13 years old, 14 years old? Uh, anyway, my third brother, like I said, he went in there for a couple of years. I followed them, and I was there 1 year when he was actually he went there for 2.5 years. He was there when I entered as a freshman. He was a junior. He left after the first semester, but my oldest brother was there also. So we were very strong Catholics, and I thought that's what my parents wanted. They never really asked me, "Is that what you want?" um, but that's what I did. Um, that plays into this a lot of things later on. Um,
Sorry to interrupt. Wait, sorry. So you mentioned that you also went to seminary school for a little bit? And then you mentioned how like you were 13 years old and you thought you had a vocation. Was there like a vocation story behind that? Because I know like a lot of priests or seminarians have their like vocation story or something that happened in their life that really made them want to pursue that. Or was it kind of just like what you said earlier, like it was kind of what your parents wanted for you and you kind of
well,
thought like
yeah,
that's
no,
what I
that's what I
should do.
thought that's what I thought they wanted for me.
Hmm.
But in reality, well, I talked to them later about that in later life, in my 30s or 40s. We were recounting stories, and I said, I thought that's what you wanted. And they go, no, man, we thought that's what you wanted. So it was a miscommunication, but my parents were very strong Catholics. I
Hmm.
mean, my dad was always helping out there. Uh, we were all altar boys. We all learned the Latin Mass. In order to become an altar boy back then, you had to memorize all the responses in Latin, and that was the requirement to become an altar boy. So the, the the four of us, the four from Mexico, we were all altar boys, and we all learned Latin and the Latin responses. And we went to church on Sundays. We went to a Catholic school. Um, it was very deeply ingrained in our family. Um, so when my brother went off to the seminary, and then my third brother went, I look at them and I looked up to those guys, and I said, I thought to myself, should I do that? And I said, yeah, I really thought that's what my parents wanted, and I really thought I had a vocation. But man, 13 years old, 14 years old, what do you know about what you want to do with the rest of your life? um, in either case, um, it worked kind of both ways. We volunteered so much at the church um, that the school gave us a break. I mean, we all went there to school, and so that the school gives a break on tuition. So that was, you give us something, we give you something back. Um, but yeah, we were pretty strong Catholics. Like it was a constant in our lives. Um, so that shaped me. One of your questions is how was your upbringing? How did it shape who you are? That's part of the story there. Um, yeah, I went there for 4 years. Um, Towards the end, when I was a junior and senior, um, I was really conflicted, and but I really thought I did have a vocation, but in the end, it didn't work out, and there's a reason why. So when I went as a freshman. They actually had a high school at the seminary for 1 year. Then they closed it down, the high school part, and they shipped us out to outside Catholic schools. So when I was a sophomore, we went to the school, San Gabriel Mission High School. It was me, my brother, my next oldest brother was there too. He left the seminary but went to the same high school. And I learned to play soccer there or in the seminary. My oldest brother was the coach. My next oldest brother was a halfback. He played in the middle, and I played defense. Um, and I became pretty good at it. I mean, my third oldest brother, he was let's see, when we played together in sophomore year, he was I think he was the most valuable player. Um, and as a freshman, I started off in junior varsity, and they moved me up to varsity. So I mean, sports is always in our lives. First with basketball, and later with soccer and rugby. But yeah, in my sophomore year, we won our league title. My oldest brother was the coach, like I said, and my next oldest brother he played halfback. I played a fullback, and that was a really great time. And then in my junior year, they closed the boys' wing on that high school, St. Gabriel Mission, and they shipped us to a different high school in Downey, California. It's called Pius X, and played soccer there. I was the MVP that my junior year. Looking towards bigger things and so forth. But they closed the program because it was back then everything was focused on the big three: basketball, baseball, and football. And soccer was just, you know. So yeah, I mean, it was interesting in my sophomore year playing with my brother, with my brother as the coach. That was a really fun time. Um, anyway, my second oldest brother didn't play soccer. Like I said, his big sport was basketball and rugby when he went to St. Mary's actually. So that was that. So that's pretty much my upbringing. Um, I don't know if you guys have any other questions related to that part of my life. Uh, let's see, it's about 10 after 5. Maybe we'll move on to the other questions, and then you guys can ask other questions as we go along. So number 5, what were the defining moments in my life, early life? As I mentioned before, right after 7th grade, I was offered that scholarship to attend that aerospace summer session at Beverly Hills High School. And they were all 13 and 14-year-old kids from all over LA. Coming into that class from 7th grade, I was one of the top students in my class. I was a leader amongst my schoolmates, played basketball, was one of the better players. I was very confident of myself. And so I show up at this, and I was the only one from my school who attended this. I would meet at another junior high school along with 2 other kids, and a bus would pick us up. And then they'd go on to different schools and pick other kids up. And they drive to Beverly Hills High School. And man, what a shock. I mean, the question is, how did your upbringing shape your personality and your life? Or not, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. What defining moments changed the way you saw yourself? I was in a bubble in where we lived, all Mexican kids and a lot of Spanish speaking kids. And here they shipped me to this Beverly Hills High School. And there was the other kids attending this class were mostly white. I remember that, and Asian. I don't remember any blacks being there. And there were two other Mexican kids. And I was in shock. In shock, not just because there was nobody else, looked like me, but how much smarter the other kids were. I mean, these guys were pretty brilliant. And reflecting on that later, I realized the distinction between schools in the ghetto or the barrio versus the high-end classes. I mean, Beverly Hills High School was a very manicured school. It was spotless. I don't think it was a new school, but it was, I mean, jeez. They had TVs in every room in high school. And I had never seen that before. I mean, the only time we saw a TV in grammar school was when the LA Dodgers won the world pennant back in the 60s. The teacher let our parents bring TVs into the room so we could watch the games while we were in school. That was the only time I saw TV at a school. At high school, I had TVs in the school. The desks were all new. It was like a shock. But what was more amazing to me, or was more surprising to me, was how much smarter the other kids were. And reflecting on that, it was just later in life. It was a distinction how different the school system is in lower class schools versus higher, upper class. It was really, it was astounding to me. It opened my eyes a lot. Getting out of my bubble and seeing another part of the world, that was kind of shocking. Um, I already talked about how my dad bought a house when I was in eighth grade, and we moved to a different school, and that was kind of a little surprising to me to be in a school with more white kids, half white kids, half Mexican kids, a few black kids. I don't recall a lot of Asian kids either, but there were a lot more white kids there. Um, so that was entirely new to me, having come from a school where almost 100% of the kids were Mexican. I mean, I recall in my class in grammar school, during the 7.5 years that I was there was just one white girl and one Chinese girl, and the rest were all Mexican. So it was kind of a shock. I'd never been exposed to that, so it's kind of that, and going to Beverly Hills High School was surprising. So it's kind of introduced me and let me know that things are different from my little bubble in East LA. Moving on to your next question about my first experiences and where I experienced any social or racial injustice. I'll tell you one thing. Being in a bubble where 95% of the kids are Mexican also, or the community, isn't it? I didn't really experience a lot of racism or prejudice. I mean, it was here and there, because there were white-owned businesses here and there, but I didn't really experience any racism. There was some prejudice here and there, but it wasn't. Um, I was a young kid. I didn't really know any better. I thought everybody was Mexican. Um, but I do recall when one of the times when we first moved to the projects, my dad worked at a shoe factory, which was about 2 blocks away. And one time he came home, um, and he had all these signs that said strike on it. And what had happened is all the workers had gone out on strike at the shoe factory. And, for better, usual thing, better wages, better conditions, that type of thing that people strike for. Um, Needless to say, everybody was fired. And within days, my dad told me they hired all new people just like him, but Mexican workers, black workers, a whole new set of people. There was a line out the door, people willing to take their place. So um, that's one thing. One thing being another thing that spoke to a lot of to me about things that I found not right or some kind of injustice. When we were young, me and my brothers were all altar boys because that was another thing we did because we were so ingrained with the church. So when I was I can't remember, 6th or 7th grade, the rectory where the priest lived was right next door, and they had a housekeeper or cook. One time the priest said, "Hey, you want to come in for lunch?" Me and this other altar boy. And I said, "Sure." I thought it was, I was expecting, a sandwich, maybe a glass of milk, because that's what we had when I was going to school there. We had, sandwiches that my mom made, bologna or ham or chicken sandwiches that she made, and that's all I was expecting. Man, what a surprise! I walk in there, we sit down. The cook comes out with this roast beef. This is lunch, okay? Roast beef, mashed potatoes, veggies, and I forgot what we were drinking, some kind of soda. And I was just like, wow. I don't I don't recall ever having roast beef when I was a kid. I mean, we had beef dishes, but not roast beef. And I ate it up. I mean, I just I thought it was the greatest thing. But it later on, in reflecting on that, I said something wasn't right. And the reason why I say that is, as an altar boy, you go out there and do the collections, where people donate money to the church. And I'd see all these poor people just giving money, people who couldn't afford it, to maintain the church, and so forth. And here the priest having roast beef for lunch. And I said, something wasn't right. And it points out another thing about that church. The religion that managed that church was an order from Spain. And so, if you know the history of Mexico, it was the Spaniards came in and conquered Mexico, the indigenous tribes there, and they forced the Catholic religion on the indigenous people there, forced them to accept the Catholic religion or be punished or killed. And so that whole colonial type thinking still was pervasive even in the US. And there were three Spanish priests there at that time. And they treated, I mean, not overtly, but they treated the people like peons. I mean, they took their money, they had roast beef for lunch. Who knows what the hell they had for dinner? But these guys lived very well. And the people in the community were barely making it. So there's a big disconnect there that was one of the things that really stood out to me. Yet, later on, I still went to the seminary. How did that work out? Anyway, it didn't work out right. Another time, like I was mentioning, my dad worked for the water bottling company. Oh, up here it's called Alhambra. You guys are probably okay. Down there it was called Sparklets. Um, so my dad was a mechanic, and he was always trying to improve himself. He was always going to school. He, like I said, he learned it. He went to school to learn English. He took additional courses to increase his skills. He even took some management courses because he wanted to get ahead. And whenever he'd apply for management positions, he'd always be turned down. And later, when he was still working there, and I was already graduated from St. Mary's, and I was working for Pacific Telephone. Um, he pulled me aside. Excuse me. I get emotional at this part. So my dad said, why won't they promote me? I've taken the classes and I'm trying to better myself. I get along with my coworkers and so forth. The thing about my dad, give me half a minute. Okay, back. How do you tell your dad that your accent is too strong? That you got the wrong color skin? And I wasn't just saying that as an excuse. But because I worked there one summer on the water bottling, the production line, and all the managers were white. All the workers were, half of them were white. They were working class. There are one or two other, one black guy, one guy from Hawaii, very dark skinned. But the people in management were all white. How do you tell your dad you don't fit the mold of what they're looking for? You talk with an accent. So I don't know. I told my dad I didn't know why he wasn't promoted, but I knew. Okay. The last thing I'll mention on this topic about injustice. Do you guys remember the Frito Bandito? No? Yes. Okay, so Lay's potato chips, they make Frito-Lay, Fritos. They came out with a marketing campaign. I don't know when it was. Back in the 60s. It was this cartoon character called the Frito Bandito. And it was this character styled as a bandito, Mexican stereotype bandito, talking in a very bad accent, talking about Frito Bandito. I mean, Fritos, Frito-Lay, corn chips. And, it was on TV. You saw it there. And we all laughed, because it was ridiculous to us. But it was really, they were really mocking us. They were they were taking our food, repackaging it, and giving it back to us. They were, stealing our cuisine and making it their own. And it was a big deal back then. I mean, I think the campaign went on for like 6 years, and finally, enough backlash happened that they took it off. But it was, to me, that was kind of a big deal, and to a lot of us who were a lot of people like me who were, it was it was funny at first when I was a kid in the 60s, but when you realize what was happening, um, it made it not right, you know. So anyway, getting off these emotional subjects. Okay, I don't know where I'm at here. Oh, okay. Um, how were my dreams and aspirations that I had as a kid? How did they change? What influenced them, and so forth? Okay, so I already mentioned how the church was a core part of our life. My parents were very religious, therefore we were religious. My brother went to the seminary, blah blah blah. I in retrospect, when I went to the seminary, I did it for the wrong reasons. Initially, I thought I had a vocation because I thought that's what my parents wanted for me. I really um, honored or respected my parents, and I did what they asked unquestioningly. Um, and it wasn't just me. That was a traditional type thing in Mexico. Um, but so I went to seminary, and but that whole dream of becoming a priest slowly kind of fell apart. It was like a Jenga game. You guys ever play that Jenga game where you have those blocks and you slowly pull one out and try not to collapse the tower? That was once you go into being in the seminary as opposed to being a parishioner at a church, you're privy to a lot of stuff you shouldn't be privy to. And one of the big things that I saw were that priests, we shouldn't hold priests to on a high, you know, hold them up to on a pedestal, which in Mexican culture we did. We held priests and bishops, whatever, on a pedestal because it was a Catholic religion, and that was one of the first blocks on my Jenga puzzle that came off. Um, I saw how these priests were. I saw their faults. I saw that they were human. I saw how petty they were. I saw how they referred to their parishioners. And it was one of the things that ultimately led me away from the seminary and eventually the church. Um, you know, I was told that, well, it's the administration, it's not the religion. And I say, yeah, but it was the first block. I mean, there were other things, but that was the first thing. I mean, well, that, and also remember I gave you that story about how the priests lived pretty well in our neighborhood, ate well and so forth. And it was the whole thing that back then they were Spanish priests, and the whole concept of colonialism, they treated they treated the parishioners like they were peons, like they were still under Spanish rule, even though we're here in the US, or what's now the US. But it's so being in the seminary kind of give you an equivalent. You're dating, you meet somebody, kind of like them, date for a few times, everything's going well. Maybe you move in with them. But then when you move in with them, you see that they're messy, that they eat crap, they chew with their mouth open. You see their faults. To me, that's what happened in the seminary. I met all these priests, and I saw their faults, and I saw the faults not only in the priest but in the church itself. Um, and that's when, so that was like the second block of this Jenga puzzle that came off, and the puzzle's teetering. The next one was more later in life, but it began back then. I began to see contradictions. Um, Contradictions in different ways, like how they treated LGBTQ people. Um, and that really came out because my daughter's a lesbian. And it came out, this whole church scandal with the priests molesting kids and so forth. I saw how they hid those type of things. They saw it and they did nothing about it. I mean, one time I went to an ordination along with the other seminarians, and we were in the reception area, and there was this old brother, and the guy was always kind of odd to me, but I remember seeing him going off into a separate room and playing with the little kids, but mostly the little girls. And at first I didn't realize what was going on until I saw my oldest brother, who was a brother at that point, come in and stand by me, and just watching this guy, with eagle eyes. And I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "I gotta watch this guy. This guy is a pedophile," and that other brother saw my brother looking at him, and he kind of backed off, and he went somewhere else. And it wasn't just him. I mean, there were priests who were obviously gay, uh, secretly, but obviously gay. I mean, secretly in that they didn't declare themselves to be gay, but um, you knew they were gay. I mean, looking back, you knew they were gay. Um, Other things kind of threw me off or showed me that they influenced my life, rather. Um, how they marginalize women, how only men can become priests. Uh, Women had to become nuns, but they couldn't become priests. But they marginalized them in other ways too. Um, you know, uh, you talk about politics. Um, I know when not this most current election, but in other elections, when abortion was a big item, Um, a lot of Catholics, to them, that was the one reason not to vote Democrat. That was the only reason, because, you know, abortion was killing kids. You know, and I would ask, well, what about the poor? What about the, you know, the how the poor are mistreated? Um, and you take that one step further. You look at the history of the church and how they dealt with indigenous people, and not just in Mexico. I mean, go to any country, third world country, Philippines, Africa. You know, the the colonizers come in, like you say in Mexico, and who comes along with them? The Catholic Church. The colonizers, you know, want to take all the the good things out of the country, the gold, the make slaves out of the people. The Catholic Church wanted to convert them all to Catholicism, and and when they couldn't convert them, they massacred them, they killed them, or they made them slaves. You know, and all these things were other planks being pulled from this Jenga puzzle. But it started when I was a kid. And then the last thing, something called it's called syncretism. Syncretism is where like a colonial power comes in and takes something that's clearly indigenous and changes it around and makes it what they're putting out. So, like, take the church. I'll take the indigenous people in Mexico. We had different gods, um, male and female. One of the important female gods was one called Tonantzin, and she was one of the primary female gods. When the Spaniards came in, they appropriated that god, and all of a sudden we had the Virgin of Guadalupe. You know, she looked the same. They kind of dressed her very similar to how she was represented in the indigenous uh, uh, people's world. But you know, they did that a lot. I mean, there was these. You know, you can go to Mexico and see all these ruins of Aztec, or you know, the right term is Mexica temples, and a lot of cases they destroyed them and built churches on top of them. You know, it's that appropriation that was another block, and for me personally, that caused this tower to collapse, and eventually led to me leaving the church. But it wasn't. I didn't do it right away because I was still indoctrinated. Okay. See, we're getting short on time, so let me just. You guys have any big questions or anything? Okay. I just wanted to give you a little context for what's coming up in, I guess, other discussions that you or questions you guys may have um, about why I turned out the way I did. Let me find my right page here. So, just a little history. Um, when I was in grammar school, um, we had friends who lived in Watts in the LA, South Central Watts area of LA. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Watts riots in 1965. So you know, it was primarily blacks that rioting started, and it was protesting, housing segregation and discrimination. The LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, uh, was a brutal police force, not just to the black neighborhoods, but the Mexican neighborhoods. I mean, they were everywhere. I mean, you saw them when I was growing up. You see them everywhere. Um, at times brutalizing people. Um, and so these riots grew out of that. I mean, people were tired of being marginalized. Unemployment rate was huge. And interestingly enough, this was in 65. If you go back a year, that's when the Civil Rights Act was voted on and agreed on, was put into law. So it's a kind of interesting point in time. So then you move forward a little bit. You get to 1968. And I was telling you what I went through in 68. My dad bought a house and we went to a different school and I was traumatized by that. But in March of that year, uh, at 5 different high schools in East LA, students walked out. I think there were about 10 to 15,000 students walked out of class protesting. They wanted better school facilities, more Mexican American teachers and administrators, more college prep courses, and an end to discrimination and harsh discipline. And one thing that I recall, they were asking for bathrooms to be open during break times, like lunch or recess. I mean, what? Bathrooms to be open? Um, and then in April, that was in March. In April, Martin Luther King was killed. In June 4th, that was my birthday. I turned 14. The next day, they had the California primary, presidential primary, and Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy won the primary, Democratic primary, and he was killed that night. When I was that age, I used to read the newspaper all the time, all the political news, and that really hit home. I think I stayed up to like 1 or 2 in the morning watching newsreels of what was happening. The next day I went to school and I was thinking, oh, they're going to be talking about this. Everybody's going to be a big deal. Teachers didn't say crap about it. So it was really disappointing. And I'm just saying all this just to give you a little context of where my mind was at. Then, during that time, the Vietnam War was going full blast. The Vietnam moratorium started around that time, 68, 69. There were protests all over the U.S. In 1970, that Kent State shooting, student shootings, and also Jackson State, all protesting the Vietnam War. And things got really more radical in the 70s, 71, 72. There were more radical groups. You may have heard of the Weather Underground, uh, SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. They're becoming more violent. Um, in August of 1970, my my brother MG was going to St. Mary's, and he was home for the summer. My third brother, he was at he was going to start Santa Clara University, and they had a summer session that they required whatever um, they required him to attend this 8-10 week course. So he was there for the summer, and me and my brother were supposed to pick him up at the airport that day. But instead, he said, before we pick him up, let's go check out this protest. And it was we had already moved out of the area, but it was only 2 or 3 blocks away from where we used to live in the projects. It started there, and there was a protest march. It was called the Chicano Moratorium, and we were protesting. And it was like a 2 mile walk protest to a park where they were going to have festivities and so forth, speakers, and we went there at the start. They had like somewhere between, depending on who you talk to, 20 and 30,000 people marching. And my brother was all jazzed about it, and he says, let's march. Let's go in for a while, and before we got to go pick up my brother. And I remember, this was a time when the Black Panthers in Oakland had started a few years earlier, and if you recall, they wore black berets and even showed up with guns at different things, different functions. So at this protest, I see what had started as a similar group called the Brown Berets, and they wore brown berets and kind of like khaki uniforms, and they marched like a little like a army troop, looking tough and all this stuff. It was kind of interesting, um, but more interesting was just the amount of people that were there protesting the high casualty rates of Mexican Americans uh, in Vietnam, protesting poverty in East Los Angeles and other uh, Mexican communities, um, limited opportunities, discrimination, inequality. They were protesting all this thing, and it was pretty much a peaceful march. I think halfway through it, me and my brother left because we had to go pick up my brother. And as we picked up my brother and going back home, all of a sudden we hear all this news about how the LAPD had all of a sudden broken up the march towards the end. I mean, forcefully. It wasn't like, you know, the march is over. It's, you guys got to go home. It's blah, blah, blah. They kind of pushed people into this park where it was supposed to end, but they pushed them in so that the only way they could get out was through one gate. And so people couldn't get out in time. And all of a sudden, it became a riot. Tear gas flying, it was a mess. So that was my first experience, the first demonstrating or protesting. And it was a peaceful protest. It wasn't until the end, when the police came in with tear gas and batons and turned something, and they even shot uh, this Mexican American reporter who worked for I think the LA Times, who was taking a break in a bar, and for some reason the LAPD shot one of those tear gas canisters in there. It went right to the window and hit this guy and killed him. So that's, oh, the last thing. When I was in high school, um, I went to, you guys aren't from LA, but there was a school called Pius X. Um, and it was mixed, um, mostly white, but um, a lot of Mexican students, a lot of black, a lot of Asian. Um, so the Mexican students wanted to create a little club for themselves, kind of a social club, but wanted to do a little bit more. And we were trying to model it after the Mecha clubs. In colleges, there was these clubs. Mecha stood for Mexican. Oh, it's in Spanish. It's called Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, the student movement of Aztlán. Aztlán is the mythical birthplace of the Aztecs. Uh, it's actually located. Nobody really knows where it's located, but some people think it's in the southwest U.S. So other people say it's on the other side of the border. But there were all these organizations modeled or calling themselves Mecha in all the college campuses. So we wanted to form one in high school. Well, the, it was a Catholic principal priest and a lot of nuns there. We went up there with our proposal and they refused to start because of everything that was going on in 71 with all this activism, student activism at the colleges, they refused to let us call it that. So the compromise that we would call the Mexican American Youth Association, or Maya, and it was kind of a dumb name, but and it was really more of a social group, but an offshoot of that was we would go tutor kids in the neighboring schools. Um, I would go down there, and I had two kids with me that they would, it was only an hour, 1 or 2 hours. I would go down there, and the idea was to help the teacher with these students. What it turned out to be was, and these were like third, fourth graders. Um, one kid didn't know any Spanish. He had just come across with his parents. Um, so I was just teaching them words in English, what they meant. The other one, I tried to teach him Spanish. I mean, not Spanish, English. We would read along, and I would help him read along, trying to help him out. Um, so um, that's pretty much all I have to say. There were other things that we did, but um, based on what I've told you and what had been happening in my life at that point, in my area, in my Southern California, um, that was like my awakening. So um, that's kind of all. I probably had more to say if I lost some pages, but we're almost close to the end of the hour, and I'll just end what I have to say. If you guys have any questions or anything, just I'll leave it wide open.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. That was like really interesting to hear, and I really enjoyed hearing about your life and everything. Thank you for taking your time to tell us about that.
Okay, so what are next steps here?
We will definitely schedule another meeting. If you are open to it, we can do one on campus. Preferably our next one, I think, if you want.
No, yeah, it'd be pretty easy to get down there. I live in Concord, so
Okay.
not that far away, and I enjoy going down to the campus and checking it out or occasionally. So that's not a problem.
Yeah, we will try to find dates. My guess is um Monday, Wednesday, Friday of next week. We haven't talked as a group yet, but if those dates work with you next week, we can try to speak with our media team on campus to see if we can schedule a room and get that all situated.
Okay.
Of course, like we'll send a follow-up email after this meeting. So, yeah, we'll let you know and then let us know what days work best for you. And then we can get it
Okay.
going from there.
That's fine. And you'll send questions or
Yes,
topics
we
you'd like to
will
discuss.
do the exact same steps, letting you know the questions beforehand. Um,
Yeah, we can send questions beforehand, and then if you decide that you'd like to come on campus, I don't know if you've heard, but there's like a media room we have, so we could conduct it.
Where's that located at?
It's on campus still.
Oh,
I
we can
actually,
meet you and take you there.
yeah, we can all meet
In
up and go in
chapel lawn.
together.
okay.
I've never been there before, but I've heard it's really cool and it's more like secluded and quiet, so we can get a better recording and like it's not in the public, so
Sure.
nice area. So we'll figure out a date between the four of us, and then we can email our professor to reserve the media room for us and see if it's available.
Okay. I'm usually available Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I would choose Monday or Wednesday first because traffic on Friday sucks.
Yeah,
Um, so last thing, was this what you expected? Was it beneficial?
it was very beneficial. It was a lot deeper than I thought.
Really?
I
Yeah.
really
I didn't know what to.
appreciate
I
everything
didn't.
you mentioned.
I mean, I saw your questions and I said, "Wow, what should I include? What should I not include?" And you know, I didn't know how to frame some answers. I mean, you guys asked about what racial things I encountered. When I was younger, I didn't. Everybody was like me, so I didn't really encounter that. It
Mhm.
was more later when I encountered more prejudice or racial issues. So I kind of was worried that this isn't really what you were expecting to hear.
No, this was perfect.
This is
I've never actually interviewed anyone before, so this is my first time doing something like this, and yeah, I really liked hearing your story and hearing everything you had to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay.
We
Well, great.
appreciate you being open with us. It was very pleasant.
Sorry I got emotional.
That's totally
it's all good.
Okay. Um, so you guys are off this week, right? So yeah, just let me know. Give me some advance notice
Yeah,
Mhm.
what dates you think will work, and yeah, just give me at least 2 or 3 days to prepare for your questions, and we can go from there.
Yeah,
perfect.
we'll converse as a group after to find a day, and then I'll send a follow-up email with all the questions for the next interview.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
let's go.
Awesome. Thank
thank
you so
you.
much. I look forward to
Enjoy your
seeing you.
holidays.
You as well.
Okay,
Oh, well.
all right, see you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right.